Good morning, everyone. Today we have the pleasure to interview Dr. Judy Mann, who is a conservation strategist for the South African Association for Marine Biological Research. Good morning, Judy. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today, and I hope your information can be very useful for all the travelers, for all the operators and agents dealing with South Africa and Africa in general. Welcome. May I start, please, asking you to introduce a little bit about yourself, your work position, your academic experience. Welcome, and thanks a lot for joining us today.
Good morning, Adriano, and thank you for this opportunity. I am passionate about the ocean, and I have worked in and associated with the ocean my entire career. So I started off, because of my passion for the sea, with studying a master's degree in ichthyology, which means I studied fish. And I spent a number of years studying the ear bones of fish, working out how fast fish grow. And after 3 or 4 years of staring down a microscope, counting the growth rings that fish deposit in their ear bones, rather like you see on a tree growth rings, I decided that really my passion was working with people. So I started my career working in the aquarium world as an educator, and I've been in the aquarium world ever since. I have worked in our organization since 1992 in a variety of different positions, and that's the South African Association for Marine Biological Research. We're a non-government, not-for-profit organization, and our organization has been in existence for about 71 years now. We operate 3 divisions. We have a large aquarium, which is what the public knows about us. We have a big education division, and then we have a large research division, the Oceanographic Research Institute. So we employ a number of scientists who are looking at human use of the ocean and how we can ensure that that is sustainable. Now, because of my years of experience, at some stage, probably about 10, 15 years ago, I decided that I really needed to focus in, again, on the human side, but from a research perspective. So I did my PhD through the University of Queensland on how people learn about the ocean and what are the ways that we can help to inspire people to care for the ocean. And I think that that takes us into the answers to a number of the questions that we're going to be discussing today. And to start off, we need to understand that the ocean is a foreign environment for us. We're terrestrial beings. We live our lives in air, on the land, without much understanding of what goes on in the ocean. We see that blue blanket that lies over the ocean, without realizing the life underneath it. And what I've learned through my many years is that everybody views the world differently. We all view the world through our own lenses. And for most people, that lens doesn't include an understanding of what exists under the ocean, which is why I believe firmly in ethical ecotourism, because it's a way of helping people to understand what happens in the ocean. We can't expect people to care for animals, for environments that they've never ever heard of, that they don't know exist. And if we're able to create powerful connections between people and nature, we've got a much better chance of inspiring care for those environments. It's the reason we have marine protected areas. It's the reason we have national parks, is to help people to see what's out there, to understand it. I mean, there are lots of other reasons we have protected areas, but one of them is really to give people an opportunity to experience these places, to inspire and to touch people's hearts. We learned a long time ago that I can know everything I need to know about an ecosystem, but if it doesn't touch my heart, I'm unlikely to change my behavior. And that's really what we're talking about now, is how do we make our ecotourism experiences meaningful? How do we make them touch people's hearts? How do we connect emotionally? And then, most importantly, how do we inspire action after that? So it's all very well having a wonderful experience and you love the animals and all the rest of it. But if we can't translate that into conservation action at home, into pro-environmental behavior, we're not actually succeeding. And that's the challenge I have for all tour operators, is how do we move from that amazing experience into real action at home?
Well, yeah, I would like to talk with you, for hours and hours. This is such an amazing, subject. And we are here exactly for this, to try to bring a little bit of awareness and knowledge for all the tour operators and also for the travelers that come to South Africa. As you know, many of them, when they think about South Africa, they think about the shark cage diving. The white sharks, they have a very big, impact on the imagination of the travelers. And many of them, especially the ones that visit Cape Town, they want to go to Hermanos, to Hans Bay, and they want to do the cage experience. So my first question to you is, what's the impact of the shark cage diving for the environment? Do you believe that this commercial activity can change the behavior of the sharks? Is the use of baits like blood or ultrasound, for example, is that acceptable? So can you start, making some considerations about the commercial activity of the shark cage diving, please?
My answer to this question often refers back to the how. And I think that that's what we have to remember really, really importantly. There is often a way of doing something that has a very limited impact on the animals. So the impact on the animals can be very minimal. And if it's done in such a way that has a really strong impact on the people doing it, I think that we have a winning combination. And that really refers back to a number of different things. So how is the operator working in terms of whether or not the sharks are attracted, how they're attracting the sharks? There are lots of different ways. There are pros and cons to different ones. How is the operator working with the people? What is the message that's coming across? Are we selling these shark dives as, wow, look at me, I'm a big, brave person and I'm doing something that's very death-defying and all the rest of it, diving with killer sharks? Or is it a way of immersing somebody in a very, very deep and real experience with an animal that is able to change people's attitudes to that animal? So I think it's really looking at how it's done and making sure that the permits are in place, the rules are in place, the regulations are in place. Those are all really, really important. And then it comes down to the ethics of each operator and making sure that the people that we work with or the people that a tourism operator works with is doing what they do ethically. And I think that often it's finding that fine line that gives people the experience that they're wanting, whilst remaining respectful of the animals, respectful of the ecosystem, and ensuring that there's a longer-term impact on that individual that really has meaning when they get home.
Do you believe there can be any connection between attacks on surfers or even people at the beach? That's very rare. We have to point that it's not something that usually happens. But do you see any connection between the attacks, shark attacks, and the diving tours? Do you think? To the best of my knowledge, I don't know. I mean, there might be in some parts of the world, there might have been, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't know of connections in that way. We have a whole range of different challenges in South Africa. We use shark nets in KZN, which is a fishing device to limit shark numbers, and that reduces opportunities for shark bites. Normally those are exploratory bites, but the shark cage shark attack link, I am not aware of a link in that respect. There might be, but I don't know about them. And this question can be also applied for other tours, but especially for the sharks. Do you believe the government really control the operators? Is there any kind of regulation what you can do, what you cannot do, and then connected to this question, what would you advise for the travel trade, but also for the clients when they are trying to do the research or find the best operator? Not all the people is aware of all these aspects, but normally they want to find an operator that's responsible, ethical. What would you recommend for all these people looking for the best operators?
So firstly, in terms of the South African government regulations, I think that they have good regulations, and I think that they're really trying to do their best with respect to regulations for shark cage diving. So I think that the regulations they've put into place are good, and I think that the enforcement and the management of those regulations is also really, really important. And then a good question about how do you choose an ethical operator? So I would be asking questions like, what research do you do on your vessel? What research do you contribute to? Has your organization actually published any papers? Are you connected to any higher research institute? So do you have any students who are with you? And then I would ask about their conservation ethics. I would ask where their money goes. Mm-hmm. So does your money go into buying bigger, better boats and overseas holidays, or does your money get plowed back into conservation? So what is your conservation ethic? And how strong and real is that conservation ethic? Do you do anything else besides shark dives? Are you involved in maybe, I don't know, seal conservation, penguin conservation? What else do you do? What do you give back to the environment for what you're gaining from the environment? So those are the questions I would ask. Two questions. Show me your research portfolio and show me your conservation work. And then on that basis, I would be choosing an operator to work with.
Awesome. So now we go to the next activity, which is the whale watching tours. I would say, what's the impacts on the ecosystem? Normally, people perceive the whale watching tours as something more sustainable because you don't really go into the water, you just stay in the boats. But many boats can also harm the whales, isn't it?
I think that that's a slightly different type of activity because you're not immersed in the water. There is no attraction of animals. It's quite a different thing. But again, it's often down to how it's done. It's respecting the space that the whales have. It's respecting the number of vessels around a particular sighting. So it's again comes back to respect for the animals in their environment. And then exactly the same as I mentioned for sharks, it's making sure that the message is not about, wow, it's such a big whale. The message is about what are we learning from that whale? What does that whale represent? That whale represents an entire ocean ecosystem we don't know much about. Where has that whale been? How does that whale help to connect the world? So it's looking at it from a bigger picture. And for whale watching, ecotourism, I think, is an absolutely brilliant way of connecting people because people have an innate connection to mammals. Mm-hmm. So it's an amazing way to connect people to these magnificent animals. And also what I love about the whale watching is that it's in South Africa, we can tell such a good news story. We can tell a story of recovery. We can tell a story of hope for the ocean. When we look at environmental issues, we tend to get a bit depressed because so many of the stories are actually bad news stories. And the story of South Africa's humpback whale and southern right whale population is a story of hope. And it's one that shows that if we make the right decisions and we take the time that we need, we can actually help the environment and we can recover species. So I always love the story of whales because it's a story that gives me hope in the eco-despair that we sometimes find ourselves in.
Absolutely. Even in the urban context of Cape Town, we see so many whales here, even outside the season. So I think, all this recovery is connected and we really see the improvement. So that's also good news, not only bad news about the environment. And now we get, to the point of the seal dives. And in this point specifically, I use a little bit my own example. I was invited for a Brian operator for a seal dive in Plettenberg Bay in Robert Peninsula. It was a very interesting activity, very interesting experience. But when we were diving with the seals, I was bitten by the seal, by the big male. And believe me, I took 2 months to walk properly again. And my biggest concern is that children is also allowed in these tours. So my first question, do we bother the seals when we go to their environment in Robert Peninsula, for example? And the second question, is it safe to do these commercial operations for children, or of course, even for women or for any, tourists that imagine they come from overseas, they go there and they have such an accident, they spoil all their holidays. So what's the first ideas about security for the seals and for the humans?
So I have never done a seal dive. I would love to do one, but I haven't done one yet. And I think that my comments about this pertain to the other two just as much. And that is obviously, along with the regulations from the environmental point of view, is the safety. And that applies to whale watching, shark diving, so whatever it is. And safety should actually be the most important consideration of all of this. I tend to believe that the operators should have covered that first. It's not something that I would expect to be thinking about in my context, because I would trust that the operators have that covered right up at the start. And I think that what you're saying is almost another level of question. So I would be looking at your research and your conservation ethics, but first and foremost, for anybody who's booking something like that would be their safety track record. So that is a critical point. In terms of whether people disturb the seals, it would be tricky to actually assess that. My sense is that the seals would just swim away if they didn't want to be around. Mm-hmm. But perhaps if you're in an area where seals are sort of feeding, maybe that might be a problem. But you need an operator who firstly really understands seal behavior. And that I would be, if somebody's been bitten by a seal, either something went badly wrong, or maybe the signs of seal aggression were not being listened to, because the seals will pretty much tell us when we should be getting out the water, I would guess. But I think that it's really making sure that your operator is experienced, so that they have a good experience of the animals. So I would say, how long have you been doing this? What is your safety record? What are your qualifications? So do you have guiding qualifications, etc.? So what is your first aid qualification? So we're looking at it from a slightly different perspective now. So while you want to go with an operator that is ethical, you want to go with an operator that is giving back to conservation, an operator that has a strong research ethic, you also want to work with an operator that has a very, very good safety record and that has safety first in terms of working with the clients. So I'm very sad that you had that experience, because it's the sort of experience that could put you off forever, which is really not what should happen. And I think often, as you say, with children, it's something that is a serious consideration, and the operator has to have a good safety record, or they shouldn't be doing what they're doing.
To be honest, I was very happy it happened with me, because I feel like, if it happened with a kid or even with my wife that was diving with me, the situation would be much worse. And this was a real motivation for me to understand more and spread the message. And just coming to my example, it was the mating season, and you have the females that don't really, have any danger. They are very friendly and they swim with you. But the big males, they are not very happy with the people diving around, the other seals, and they do attack. It was a real bad bite, And after doing some research as well, I saw other cases of people, you know, from England, from Germany, from South Africa, that had such bad experiences. So my conclusion was, I don't think there are very strong regulations. There are not really, you know, people from Robert Peninsula, Cape Nature, or from the government doing this work that we have to do. We have to understand what's the operator qualification and experience, all of that. But normally when the tourist comes to South Africa, he expects that South Africa would provide this first trial. So we can come to the conclusion that most of all, it's the traveler or the tour operator who has to rely on their information to do the right decisions. Am I wrong?
So I think that as I started out, I didn't look at health and safety as being the first consideration to ask questions. I was speaking about research and conservation, because I would exactly as you have said, assume that that is a baseline that is taken care of already. But often what happens is if you've got a new type of tourism, and I think the seal is, as I say, I've never done it, but I think the seal diving is relatively new. I don't know how long it's been going for. And maybe it's something that needs to be better managed and better regulated if what you're saying is what's been happening. I haven't heard of it, so I don't know about that. But I think it's certainly something that has to be taken very seriously and regulated, just as every other form of ecotourism is regulated.
Perfect. Well, what I can suggest, if just in case you go to Plettenberg Bay, please let me know beforehand. I'm going to organize a seal dive for you, and then we do another interview, you know, with your impressions, and it would be, you know, a big pleasure to go deeper into one of each themas. But for now, I can only thank you very, very much for your attention. Your time is a really fascinating, you know, interview.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Doutora Judy Mann, muito obrigado pela sua presença, pela sua entrevista super esclarecedora. Eu espero que os benefícios da informação possam ser propagados a todos os viajantes, os operadores, os agentes de viagem que trabalham com o destino África do Sul, e que isso possa também reverter em benefícios para o meio ambiente. Muito obrigado a todos vocês que acompanharam a nossa entrevista. Um abraço a todos.